Well, the time is just gone, 6 minutes past 8, as we kick off this morning, taking a look at the head of state's BRICS summit, where the South African President Cyril Ramaphosa made a powerful call for peace, for stability, and also greater connectivity across the global south. And joining us this morning to unpack what President Cyril Ramaphosa had to say, we're joined by the Deputy Executive Director of the Afro Middle East Center, Zeenat. So Zeenat, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and Jum'ah Mubarak to you and to the listeners.
To you as well. We trust and hope that you have a wonderful Jummah ahead. And we know all eyes were on the heads of state BRICS summit, Zeenat, and particularly looking at South Africa, looking at our position on Palestine. And once again, we've learned of President Cyril Ramaphosa reaffirming the support for Palestine at the BRICS summit. And perhaps if you could just, take us through as an overview, or perhaps even elaborate on how this fits into South Africa's historical stance on Palestine.
I think that for most of your listeners, we're aware of South Africa's history and its subsequent support for the Palestinians, that we have seen parallels between South Africa's decolonial and anti-apartheid struggle and that of the Palestinians trying to liberate themselves from the occupation of Israel for the past 75 years, and certainly for the last year, as there has been such a bombardment against Gaza and an ethnic cleansing and annihilation or extermination policy being developed by Israel. So it was quite significant that President Ramaphosa took the opportunity at the BRICS summit to raise this issue. But also what it does is it shifts the narrative, as we've been witnessing in the multilateral fora, of how crippled the United Nations became in response to the genocide in Gaza. And here, BRICS presents some kind of an alternative, a return to some kind, a format of multilateralism, and trying to reaffirm the rights of the Palestinians. I think it's also significant that you had a Palestinian presence with President Mahmoud Abbas, who was also in attendance at the summit, along with 36 other countries, and that this was the first real BRICS Plus meeting with 9 members. So this does signify quite a global geopolitical shift. And I think that it's significant, certainly, that Palestine has been on the agenda.
Well, Zinat, you're talking about this geopolitical shift as well. And what BRICS presents or represents also is this shift away from Western hegemony, particularly looking at Western Europe and looking at the United States of America. And when we talk about Palestine, or when we refer to Palestine, we know what the position has been, particularly from Western Europe and the United States of America. So yeah, we have a fundamental shift, and looking at BRICS as a forum, but also in terms of the call that President Cyril Ramaphosa has made to the global South.
Absolutely. But I still think that in terms of the language that was used by President Ramaphosa, and also in terms of the BRICS communique that came at the end of the summit, there's still a reflection on a two-state solution. And yes, that reaffirms the United Nations positions, but it doesn't address the current realities on the ground. And there has been a significant shift. So unless those two-state solution parameters are defined, it's going to be very difficult for any bloc, whether it is BRICS, the G7, the United Nations, to actually determine what a Palestinian state would look like going forward. These are issues that seems to be mouthed and seems to be put into press statements for a little bit of luster here and there, but it really lacks substance. And I think that's where the core issues have to be. What I'm also concerned about when it comes to the BRICS is that whilst the statement is a unified statement at the end of the summit, we still have members who are very much allied to the Israelis, and that includes a founding member of BRICS being India, And now we also have the UAE. So it would be very interesting to see how this dynamic plays out, what their interpretations of this final statement on the recognition of the need for a solution to the situation in Palestine. And I think that's why there was heavy focus on the humanitarian aspect to avoid the intricacies of the political aspects.
Yes, I think Zenat, you made a very, very telling point with regards to countries like India and the UAE, because you've got quite a mixed bag within BRICS at this point in time and their position. And is this forum only going to limit itself to social issues or economic, cultural development within these BRICS nations? And apart from just India and the UAE, South Africa in particular has also come under the radar, despite our position on Palestine, the coal exports to Israel. We see a lot of these things happening and playing out in the background. And once again, it raises question marks whether BRICS would be that forum, to challenge the Western hegemony, and at the same time also taking a meaningful stance, one that will positively yield results for the people of Palestine.
I think that it does challenge the Western hegemony to quite a degree. And I've seen comparisons of what the current BRICS formation looks like, and that is from the optics that we've seen over the last few days and compared to the G7, for example. But again, as I said, the individual country positions are very different in comparison to what has been done as a collective. And you've got these new dynamics coming in. For me, certainly, as I've mentioned, the India is quite a strong ally to Israel. They've been supplying Israel with some of the weapons that have been used in Gaza, and vice versa. The Israelis have been supplying India with weaponry and with the technological know how in their occupation of Kashmir. So we cannot divorce this issue. And consider that we're talking about decolonization of Gaza and of the entire Palestine, and then we don't talk about the issue of Kashmir, and that doesn't get tabled, or we don't talk about the UAE's interference into areas like Sudan and the arms trafficking. I think one of the things that stood out for me is that immediately after the BRICS summit, Modi has met with the German Chancellor, and we know Germany's position has been of absolute support for the Israeli genocidal intent in Gaza, and that has been not just in terms of their political position, but also in terms of the arms trafficking that has gone into Israel, whereby German weaponry has been used against Palestinians. And that this has been an unfailing position that Germany has stood by, mainly from their own guilt of the Holocaust and casting that blame onto the Palestinians who have had to pay the cost of that over the last 75 years.
Yes, in fact, there seems to be a lot of internal dynamics playing out as a result of some of the issues that you've mentioned, particularly relating to India as well. Because just this morning, there was a report that India has reportedly blocked Turkey's bid to BRICS membership because of its close association with Pakistan. So you've got all these internal dynamics also playing out. You spoke about the relationship between Israel and India, the whole question surrounding Kashmir, Palestine. These are occupations, the oldest occupations that have never ever been resolved. So having with all of this, at the end of the day, I'm not too sure whether these internal dynamics are going to impact on BRICS and ultimately also yield the desired results.
I think these are very significant dynamics. So, if we look back at the BRICS formation, it initially began specifically as an economic bloc with Brazil, Russia, India, and China. Later, South Africa joined, and there were questions as to whether South Africa actually fit in terms of its economic prowess. But it seemingly worked quite well. And through the South African interventions, there have been the openings for other countries to join. Part of that, and one of the most significant things that took place, was that China brokered a peace agreement between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And that was ahead of last year's BRICS summit that was held here in South Africa, in order to try and appease those two nations, bring them to the same table. Both of those nations were invited to be part of BRICS. Iran accepted and has been formally incorporated into BRICS. Saudi Arabia has yet to accept the invitation. So that was quite a significant rapprochement. We hope that the BRICS then would be able to act positively in a similar vein. But again, its main focus has been economic, and it is developing a new financial model for the international community to be able to rely on. And that is a major shift. How that impacts on the geopolitics and impacts on individual countries' positions is still to be told. We know that there are a number of other countries that have applied for BRICS membership, and you've mentioned the question of Turkey. Turkey was first invited to a BRICS summit in 2018 here in South Africa, and so that was one of the very first countries to be added to a broader BRICS meeting without being a BRICS leader or without being a member. And now that India is blocking that participation, it's also in terms of the Pakistani application. Pakistan has also applied, and certainly, as India has done in other fora, they would not want to see Pakistan, being one of their greatest rivals, be at the same table. It's really very telling as to how the original BRICS members are going to be determining who becomes the next members. What I understand from reports emanating this morning is that they've suspended the question of allowing additional BRICS members at this stage as fully fledged members, but they will allow for some of those countries to be in attendance on invitation as a BRICS Plus meetings do go ahead.
Zeenat, we're going to go for a quick break. We'll be back in a minute.
This is Salam Media.
After the recent attacks on Gaza, many families have been displaced with their homes left destroyed. Through your donations, our teams are on the ground in Gaza, providing support and delivering necessary aid to families affected. The people of Gaza need your help. Give hope. Donate today to Penny Appeal South Africa. www.pennyappeal.org.za 031 1100 573.
We are here on the ground with many appeal organizations in Gaza.
You know, it's a wonder how kids get anything done these days. With all the distractions, when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil, triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying, or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
One child, one dream.
A journey with African Muslims Agency that began 3 years ago has changed the lives of Syrian and Palestinian refugee children beyond their dreams. Help them to continue their education by sponsoring a student at the Amman School of Excellence in Lebanon for 25,200 Rand per year. Education at Amman can provide a brighter future for refugee families.
AMA, empowering, educating, inspiring.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042 203 1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
Connect and stay ahead with Salam Media. This is Salam Media, coming to you live from South Africa.
The conflicts that continue to rage in the world are of great concern to us. The continuing conflict in Gaza, the Middle East, resulting in the death of so many Palestinians, is a matter of great concern. We must continue to insist that there should be a ceasefire with immediate effect, and that there should also be recognition for the self-determination of the Palestinians. We have achieved progress on a number of areas, and this level of progress that we have achieved must encourage us and inspire us to do more. And it must also make BRICS to become an even more effective instrument for global peace and for global progress at all levels, economic and otherwise.
Well, that was South African President Cyril Ramaphosa at the BRICS summit in Russia. And as we continue with the Deputy Executive Director at the Afro Middle East Center, Zeenat Adam. Zeenat, just to continue and just listening to what President Cyril Ramaphosa has spoken about, again, the question is, is there ever a chance, is there ever a possibility of a unified stance? As the president appealed to the heads of states, talking about the Palestinian people and finding a solution to the problem. But again, there are different political ideologies that dominate these countries and their position on Palestine. How easy, how difficult is it going to be to have a united stance from a BRICS perspective on the Palestinian question?
Well, I think it really depends on what the lowest denominator is and where that certainly comes down to. What are they agreeing on? And if you're looking at the humanitarian aspect, then I think most of the countries would certainly agree that a ceasefire is required and that the end of the genocide is brought about. Again, what appears to be happening is that whilst they may have a unified position in that respect, how that plays out on a broader international stage at the United Nations, for example, is quite interesting and concerning. We've seen that the veto power by Russia being used against some of the resolutions at the United Nations certainly crippled the Security Council. Vice versa, the United States then also crippling the Security Council's decisions last year on the genocide. When Cyril Ramaphosa speaks about the need for a ceasefire, I think that it is really at the very basic perspective. And we know from yesterday that US Secretary Blinken was in Qatar and that there's been an announcement made that there will be an attempt to resume the ceasefire negotiations. We know that this has been on again, off again. There has been deep frustration on the part of the mediators, Qatar and Egypt being also now a BRICS member. And we know that one of the preconditions that the United States has now emphasized is that there cannot be a Hamas-led Gaza going forward. So the questions are, how do you negotiate a ceasefire with preconditions such as that? We know that the previous ceasefire negotiations came to an end in May when Joe Biden insisted that there was agreement on all parties' sides towards the ceasefire, and then Netanyahu withheld that and turned back on it, saying that he would want to create a buffer zone along the Rafah border. We have seen how on various occasions the Israelis have backtracked on those ceasefire negotiations, including the assassination of the lead negotiator on the Palestinian side, Ismail Haniyeh, and then, of course, the killing of Yahya Sinwar just last week. So this hugely impacts on the actual ceasefire negotiations. And no matter how much of political speak and calls for ceasefire and statements that are made, whether it's by Cyril Ramaphosa or by any other organizations or leaders, that is not happening as long as we see the complicity of countries such as the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, India, and others in terms of the arms deals that are done with Israel in supporting Israel in its genocide, and even in the supply of troops on the ground, in encouraging Israel towards its ethnic cleansing of this region. And we know that this is also leading to a protracted, extended, and expansionist war, including Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, and the likelihood from the far right of the Israelis is that what they would like to see is the expansion of Greater Israel, and that means the encroachment into many other countries, including Jordan, Saudi Arabia. So it is quite baffling that most of these countries continue to support a Zionist policy, including those countries that are a threat.
Yes, Zeenat, just looking at the South African position, and as you were talking, South Africa obviously took a very, very strong position, the case taken to the ICJ. And I just needed your thoughts for a minute on the absence of the Naledi Pandor factor. Particularly now at the BRICS summit, and we know, Naledi Pandor obviously spearheaded and right at the forefront of the struggle of taking the case to the ICJ. And now that she is no longer in office, she is no longer in cabinet as well, and we have this government of national unity. And is South Africa still strong enough to adopt the position? And also, when we saw Dr. Naledi Pandor also calling for reform within global organizations like the United Nations as well. Is that a factor now, and is this likely to impact on South Africa and the position we have adopted on Palestine?
I think that the formation of the Government of National Unity has certainly affected our foreign policy with respect to the Palestinian issue. The dilution of the government has impacted on how strongly those statements are made. But because South Africa has already made the commitment to go through the ICJ, and they have credible people behind the scenes, including the current Foreign Minister Ronald Lamola and the Director General Zain Dango, I think that we would still have quite a significant presentation to the ICJ. We know that South Africa is presenting their memorial, which is their body of evidence, to the ICJ before the end of this month. But I do feel that the removal of Dr. Naledi Pandor and Mandla Mandela as parliamentarians has really affected the dynamics within Parliament with respect to the Palestinian question. I really hope there will still be robust discussion. But as we've recognized, even from the statements from the DA around the BRICS summit, saying that they do not endorse and support everything that President Ramaphosa has said at the BRICS summit in respect of allying with Russia and in respect of the Palestinian issue, we have to be cognizant of these dynamics within our own government.
Yes, Zena, just moving away from Palestine and looking at South Africa and our position within the African Union, and we know what is playing out in Sudan at this point in time again, and just with the radar focused on the African Union and its ability to resolve conflicts. South Africa, a major player on the African continent with a lot of influence as well, and just taking a look at South Africa and the AU, and also even when we talk of the global south, a unified African position, not only on Sudan, in addressing the problem in Sudan, but also on Palestine.
Interestingly, let's start with the Palestinian issue since we were still in the discussions around that. But Israel has been working very, very hard on the African continent for a number of decades, but very specifically in the last few years to try and curry favor with African countries. And more recently, I think it was last month or within the last few weeks, that Israel held some Israel Africa coordinating summit with very specific countries from the continent, trying to sway them towards a favorable Israeli position. Unfortunately, there are many countries who do assert their support for the Israelis individually once again, and then collectively at the African Union. This has been a very strong debate where South Africa has taken the lead in trying to ensure that the African Union remains true to its decolonial principles in addressing the situation in Palestine and in having that kind of solidarity with the Palestinians. But South Africa and Algeria, who have led this, have been met with strong opposition from countries that would rather look at the normalization of relations with Israel in line with what was known as the Abraham Accords. And that would include countries like Morocco, Kenya, even Ethiopia. And this really challenges a unified position within the African Union. Moving over to the issue of Sudan, I think that it's really one of the worst humanitarian crises that our world has ever faced. And the actual sad reality is that Sudan doesn't reach the headlines because it is an African country. There's still racism when it comes to reporting, and when it comes to empathy of the human race. People find it easier to empathize with the Ukraine, for example, rather than consider what's happening in Africa. And it's almost dismissed as these things happen in Africa and so what? But 20,000 people or more have been killed. We're looking at over 11 million people displaced. That is an enormous amount. Internally displaced or moved over across into border countries. And that is unfathomable. And they're into these refugee and displacement camps that are prone to disease. There is famine taking place. There is lack of access by humanitarian organizations because of the warring parties blocking that access. And so it's really something that the world needs to be taking note of. And there hasn't been sufficient pressure on the warring parties to reach a ceasefire agreement. Within the African Union, there has been the speak about having an African solution to the African problems. President Cyril Ramaphosa has met with one of the warring parties in January of this year. That's Hemeti from the Rapid Support Forces. And he's met with Malik Agar, who's from the Sudan Transitional Sovereign Council, trying to encourage a move towards a ceasefire, but that is still very elusive. There were discussions in Jeddah that have failed. There were discussions in Geneva to which the Sudan Armed Forces did not send representatives. And in addition to that, what we're looking at is a rapid proliferation of arms in the region, some of that coming through the United Arab Emirates, who appears to be supporting the rapid support forces. But what we often forget, Brother Inayat, is that the Rapid Support Forces, whilst it has its origins in the Janjaweed during the Darfur Wars, was also supported by the European Union very strongly over the last decade and tasked with the role of stopping any migration from Africa going to the Mediterranean and crossing over into Europe. And so they were emboldened by the Europeans as well, with arms, with political prowess. And this plays a significant role when you have outside interference like this. And Sudan is a very strategic country in the Horn of Africa. But again, as I've said, because it's in Africa, the optics of it are often forgotten. And we don't realize the lucrative nature of Sudan is such that it is very rich in uranium and in gold. And that is being pilfered out of Sudan on a massive scale. Certainly gold is going into the UAE, and this is really depriving the country of any possibility of growth and development for the future.
Well, Zeenat, we're going to have to leave it at that. I know there's a lot more that we can unpack when we're talking about Sudan and Africa in general. But unfortunately, time is of the essence. But as always, we do appreciate your time. Jazakallah so much, and have yourself a wonderful Jummah ahead as well. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Zeenat Adam, Deputy Executive Director at the Africa Middle East Center, with us this morning. We're going to go for a quick break. We come back, we'll be focusing on developments in Turkey.